thank you all for coming. I do have a couple thank yous I want to get out before we get started. First, I want to thank my amazing Mighty Earth team here. Everyone wearing a shirt is a volunteer, an intern, someone who has given their time to this issue. And I mean, I hope they're getting something out of it in return, but can we give them a round of applause because they're awesome. Yeah. Thank you. And then thanks to our wonderful speakers who are here today. I'm really excited to hear from all of them about some of the issues, of course, that we're facing today with our climate, with our planet, but also, you know, very importantly, some of the solutions that are out there or could be out there and ways that we can help make those real. So hopefully you'll learn a little something and we'll get the discussion going. And this is just the start of a conversation. We've got a lot of work ahead of us and a lot of conversation ahead of us. And it's exciting. It's exciting here in Iowa, right? So without further ado, I'll let everyone introduce themselves. And go ahead, Connie.
Okay, just a name?
Yeah, just a little bit about yourself.
Connie Utel.
Can you talk a little bit about just a sentence of what you do?
Okay. I'm friends to many people in this room, I'm proud to say, and I have done a lot of writing and talking about environmental problems in Iowa.
Thank you, Connie. My name is Margaret Hansbrough. I'm with Mighty Earth, and I'm a campaign director with Mighty Earth. I'm excited to be back here in the Midwest. I only left about a year and a half ago, and so I'm excited to be here to talk about the issue of agriculture, climate, and conservation, and excited to hear from the other panelists. And thank you to our partners Sunrise and Sierra Club who are here tonight as well.
I'm Susan Aram. I'm the only one without a mic because they knew better.
I have to share it with Margaret.
Yeah, please. I'm the Executive Director of the Sustainable Iowa Land Trust. It's really great to see everybody here tonight.
I wasn't planning on having my own microphone, so. My name is Chris Hoffman. I'm a business developer for Moxie Solar up in North Liberty. A lot of heads nodding. You know who we are. We knocked out solarized Johnson County last summer in a big way, so thank you.
Thanks, Chris. I'm Mike Carberry. I'm the Director of Green State Solutions, an environmental and energy consultant business I've had for 20 years. I spent the last 4 years as a Johnson County supervisor where I started the Solarized program, and Chris knocked it down 181 installs, like 1.1 megawatts of solar installed in basically Iowa City, Johnson County this last summer. So we're very proud of that project, and thanks Chris for he met with everybody, like 500 meetings, and to get 181 sales. Great, thank you, Chris. You're welcome.
Wonderful. Thank you for being here. And before we really dig into everything, yes, thank you for reminding me. Thank you so much to two of our co-sponsors, Sierra Club here in Iowa City, and then we've got the Sunrise Movement, which is a new group they're establishing in Cedar Rapids. Well, Sunrise isn't new, but the chapter is. And I know that they have a big kickoff meeting coming up on April 6th. Yes. So, again, lots of great work to be done. So thank you to both of you for co-sponsoring, bringing some of the snacks, also helped out by 100 grannies, so thanks for that. And then, yeah, before we totally launch in, I do want to tell you a little bit more about Mighty Earth. So we are a global nonprofit environmental organization. We work to protect forests, waterways, and climate. We have organizers on the ground in various places around the country and also around the globe, often working in issues having to do with deforestation. A lot of the campaigns that we do have something to do with agriculture and working on reforming that in a way that is sustainable, so that we are not digging up our planet in order to produce things that we could get otherwise. So we have campaigns all over. This is actually my second campaign that I've worked on with Mighty Earth. And here in Iowa City, we're working on the Real Climate Action Better Than Biofuels campaign, working to move away from some of the destructive agriculture that is happening here in the corn and soy and the monoculture and moving towards real climate solutions, wind and solar energy, land conservation programs, and supporting farmers who farm sustainably. So you'll hear a little bit more about that from Margaret. But that's a little bit more about Mighty Earth. You can find us at mightyearth.org as well. And yeah, thanks for having me here in Iowa City. It's been wonderful. I'm originally from Minnesota, so also a fellow Midwesterner, and it's fun to be here. So, all right, let's dig in. Start with Connie. Tell us a little bit.
Okay, so I was asked to introduce the subject, and I guess what I'd like to do is to first of all think about the title, Corn, Climate, and Conservation. And I thought about that title. To me, it says this: corn represents what people want or think that they need from our planet. Okay, that's the human need. Conservation refers to the natural world, what we call the wild world, whatever. The other 10 million species that populate this world. And then climate refers, of course, to the problem that can be created when the clashes between the natural world's needs and human desires are not in balance and lead to disbalance. So I'm going to try to talk about that through talking about the evolution of the landscape in Iowa, hopefully very quickly, and look at Iowa, and I'd like to ask you to picture Iowa with me at three times. In 1800, before, when we had Native Americans that had been here for thousands of years, but no settlement, maybe a few traders and a few, native settlements, but otherwise very few people, very few Euro-American settlers. And then in 1900, when Iowa had been pretty much transformed, the landscape had been transformed from prairie to agriculture, and then the present time, at which we have the landscape being transformed again through technology, and technology putting very intensive, very major pressures on the land, and the natural world being kind of displaced. So we go from dominance by the natural world to kind of what I like to think about as a nice happy medium in around 1900, and then to the natural world being severely challenged now, and the agricultural processes taking dominance. So very quickly, think about Iowa 1800s. In the 1800s, Iowa was dominated by prairie. 80% of Iowa was prairie. It was one of the most diverse ecosystems in North America. 1,000 species of vascular plants, and those plants created a lot of what we call ecosystem services, mostly through the very deep, rich roots of the prairie plants, which went down much longer than the prairie plants were tall above the soil. And those prairie roots produced a lot of good things. For example, they stored carbon. They moderated the flow of water by holding water so that water flowed very, very slowly underneath the ground. And because of that, you didn't have rapid rises in the water quantities going up and down, the flash floods that we now have. So you had very little flooding compared to now. And also very little water pollution, because the water going through the soil couldn't carry the soil into the smaller streams or the sloughs that were flowing slowly across the landscape. So that the natural world was healthy, it functioned well, it had a lot of ecosystem services. It was what we would call sustainable. And by that, I don't mean that every organism had a future, but rather that the species had a future. If a species existed was one of the 1,000 species of vascular plants, 1 year, 1,000 years from that time, it was likely to still be there and to be living in a healthy balance. This started to happen in the 1830s when we started to get Euro-American settlers coming in large numbers. Interestingly, about that time, we also had the birth of the science of climate change, and a physicist, Joseph Fourier, in Europe, defined the problem of climate change. He said that carbon dioxide was necessary to keep the Earth warm, but that if we had got too much carbon dioxide up there by burning fossil fuels, we were going to overheat. So that was almost 200 years ago. Let's jump ahead to 1900, after which this was just a mere 70 years. And in that 70 years, one human lifetime, we had the prairie being pretty much wiped off the surface of Iowa. How was that done? It was done by plowing, mostly by plowing the soil. And with that plowing, you had the roots being exposed to the air, so we think that we had a big whoosh of carbon, which contributed in a major way to the rise of carbon dioxide, which was still small compared to now, but still it was starting to climb in the atmosphere. You had farming bringing in annual plants in large numbers. And once you get annuals rather than perennials, you have the soil exposed for a large portion of the year, which means that rain can wash soil and other pollutants off of the Earth's surface into water courses, which means you have pollution, water pollution starting. And you also have flooding starting because you had cattle and other animals being introduced. Those animals compacted the soil. The croplands themselves bared the soil so that you had soil washing off along with manure and pollution. The water became polluted with those two substances. And I said flowing, basically carbon increasing, flooding increasing, water quality degrading, and water quantity in flash floods increasing. And the soils also were degraded. So whereas prairie soils are kind of fluffy and store a lot of water, the compacted soils that we have now are not able to do that. But still, as I said, I think that this was a time that was pretty happy. Ecosystems and people, I think, were in much better balance, certainly than now in Iowa. We still had a lot of nature preserves where we could have pollinators reproducing, where we could have animals and insects and birds that would keep crop pests in control, a lot of natural controls. We still had some carbon being pumped underneath the soil and stored in roots, and some control over flooding and water degradation. So by 1900, it's interesting, by 1900, 70 years after Fourier wrote his stuff, we already had the first lay guide to climate change being written in Europe. We had a Swedish physicist doing calculations on how much temperature would rise if we doubled the concentration of carbon in the atmosphere, carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. We had the first weather measurements being taken in the 1880s so that we were getting real numbers, so we had data. So a lot of good things were happening in terms of the advance of climate science, but we still didn't really see climate change happening. We didn't see a lot of results of the increased carbon dioxide. That we've left to our century, I think. So now let's jump ahead to now. What do we see? Well, we see all of the trends that were really incipient, I think, in the landscape in the around 1900. All of those trends being driven to an extreme and expressing themselves with great intensification. And to the point where we have swung, as I said before, from a nature-dominated system that was sustainable to a human-dominated industrial system that is totally unsustainable and really extreme. And what I think we need to do is to come back, not spill our drinks, and also to come back to more of a middle ground where we integrate nature into the landscape. So what have we done in the last 50 years? I think the most important thing happened between 1900 and 1950. In 1900, we still had a tight energy cycle with horses and donkeys and the like operating the farm machines and producing the manure that fertilized the land. And their food was produced right there on the land. So it was an energy cycle like this. By 1950, farmers had gone to tractors. Energy was being imported from great distances. Total switch in the energy cycle. Once you could get rid of the animals that ran the farm machine, you could get rid of the perennial crops that they ate and the pastures that they ate. You could pull the cows off of the land and put them in confinement units. And then in addition to those things, and so there was a big swing from about 1930 to 1950, and then ongoing from there to a swing to domination by two crops. So we've gone to 1,000 species on the land to 2 species on 2/3 of Iowa. Huge change. So in that century, again, we've gone from very small farms, diverse farms, to huge farms, and we've gone from diversity to simplicity, and big changes. And the perennial plants to annual plants. And annual plants are always bad news in terms of water pollution and flooding. So that's basically what we have now. We have a situation where the problems foster, environmental problems that we have now foster climate change. Climate change, now the emissions in the United States are 9% of those emissions are produced by agricultural technology, not just all of the food processing system, that's something more, but just the production of food on the farm, 9% of our greenhouse gas emissions. And then the rising temperature in turn fosters agricultural problems. So we have, in addition to the pollution now with both chemicals and manure and soil, we have toxic algal blooms because of the temperature rising and situations like that. So what do we need to do? As I said, I think we need to get a more of a compromise back on the land, bring nature back in the land. Iowa State University has shown with research that you can add small portions of native plants into farm fields and reduce tremendously the production of toxic what am I saying here? If you put a small strip of perennial plants, maybe 10% of the land into cornfields or into soybean fields, you can reduce soil runoff by 90%. And there are statistics like that for nitrogen runoff as well. So, thank you.
Thank you, Connie. You could give David Attenborough a run for his money. Seriously,
I talk fast enough.
that was impressive in terms of just a snapshot of 200 years. You told the whole story. So, one of the things that we talk a lot about at Mighty Earth is the link between deforestation and protecting wildlands and natural areas from the effects of agriculture. And so, this last year has been kind of an unprecedented year in terms of climate news, climate bad news, and in response, kind of a torrent of media leaders and, for the most part, ordinary citizens calling for action. The most dire warning we've heard thus far came in October with that UN report, 12 years to decarbonize our economy. Good things are happening on, frankly, the clean energy electricity front. The wind is literally at our back on that issue, but when it comes to agriculture, we got a lot of work to do. It's an issue that can no longer be ignored. And the good news is, there have been major shifts in public opinion. All this news, all these reports, all this action is changing opinions. Here in Iowa and elsewhere, you're seeing climate change register as, a top 1, 2, 3 priority with a lot of folks in the public. But, we've also had just relentless year of extreme weather events. My family's in Kansas City. We have family in Iowa and Chicago. I felt guilty being on the East Coast, not experiencing that, 2 months of folks basically locked in their homes, not able to drive very often, not able to get what they need because of extreme cold, relentless snow. And now we're seeing that snow melt. And it's only March, guys. And we're already seeing some pretty scary effects on the 35 corridor. But there's reason to hope. There's a lot of solutions. I think what Connie explained was the reality is we actually do know what to do. We've done it before. We actually did it for, thousands and thousands of years in terms of retaining carbon sinks, natural areas, sustainable agriculture. There are ways that we can reform our policies and go back to a more sustainable, a more common ground, more balance in the way we do things. It's no secret the effect of agriculture's effect on climate change. Globally, you're looking at 12-15% of global emissions. And it's going to have to be an incredibly important part of our solution-based approach. If we stayed in the broad issue of agriculture, we might get a little lost. It's pretty broad. So I'm going to talk a little more specifically about food-based biofuels, because this is actually a relatively new phenomena. It's, less than 15 years old in terms of some of the policies that help create it, and specifically corn ethanol and soy biodiesel. About 2007, a national policy was passed called the Renewable Fuel Standard, the RFS, and it incentivized and mandated corn and soy and other more cellulosic biofuels as well, but really corn and soy to be grown for fuel. At the time, everybody thought this was great. There wasn't a lot of science, but the limited science on it said, oh, it's carbon savings. People like the idea of growing their own fuel, fuel security, things like that. It had a lot of bipartisan appeal. But pretty quickly, by 2008, there was a growing scientific consensus that this was a big mistake, a very big mistake. The modeling originally and the kind of the carbon accounting, if you will, was off. They basically didn't factor in the potential effects around land use change. And so what happened was, the RFS was set, lots of dollars were put on the table to grow corn and soy, and this just drove demand out of the park globally. And so that meant that folks who were growing other more food-based fuel or food-based crops, even just soy and corn for food, things were displaced to make room for these new food-based biofuel crops. And so the land use change was starting to become very, very significant. 2008, 2015, and just recently, a couple of weeks ago, the National Wildlife Federation put out a new report, basically adding to what is a firm scientific consensus that when you factor in the land use change from food-based biofuels, both here in Iowa, nationally and globally, the carbon emissions are almost double, making these fuels either worse or the same as fossil fuels. And so, in retrospect, it's a pretty big step backward. There are cellulosic biofuels that are, waste-based. I know some of the interesting research being done here at U of I, University of Iowa, that shows some promise in that. But that's like 2% of the market. It's, minuscule by comparison. And so, a decade later, more than a decade later, the science is clear. And one of the things we're trying to do here in Iowa is to start asking some hard questions about this issue. And this is a hard state to ask those questions when you have a lot of livelihoods bound up now in this market. And we're starting to ask hard questions with our volunteers, with the public, and also these candidates who are running for office and saying, it's clear that food-based biofuels are not a real climate solution. There's really no question about it. We need better solutions for everybody involved, but particularly better solutions for farmers. We need policies that incentivize sustainable agriculture, that eliminate and reduce risk. It's a pretty stressful, scary thing to be a farmer these days. So we need policies that incentivize, doing the right thing. At this point, about 40% of all corn grown in the United States goes directly to biofuels. One of the other things we realize is that, part of sustainable agriculture will have to be the integration of conservation as a part of that. That carbon farming needs to be, a real viable solution in any policy that is passed to reform agriculture, but particularly to address climate change. Particularly here in Iowa, you can see some of the biggest land use changes in South central Iowa and southern Iowa, northern Missouri, right down there, halfway between, Des Moines and Highway 34 in Missouri. But you see similar land use changes in the last 10 to 15 years directly due to biofuels. So some marginal lands, previously conserved lands, all of those have been put back into the market, and the carbon that was stored there is gone. It's in the atmosphere at this point. So in terms of solutions, we're looking for solutions in terms of sustainable agriculture, but we also realize that biofuels were put out there as trying to replace fossil fuels. In the last 10 years, we've seen a real shift toward electrification. So if auto companies and state and local leaders are talking about electrification of vehicles, where are all these food-based biofuels going to go, right? There's kind of an incongruence in those two directions and those two signals. And we think electrification is going to be the way of things in the future, particularly in terms of cars and trucks. So we need real climate solutions. We need to reform the RFS. There was a bill introduced, I think, a year or two ago called the Greener Fuels Act that offered some real meaningful reforms. But any Green New Deal, any new farm bill, all of these things are going to have to be addressed. Thank you.
Okay. So for those of you who don't know, the Sustainable Iowa Land Trust is a nonprofit organization statewide that specializes in one thing and one thing only: permanently protecting land to grow healthy food. That's a pretty packed mission statement, but what it basically means is that we want to grow food because the last time we checked, who here in the room ate? Did you eat today? Really? Only 2 of you? Honest to God? I want to be on your diet. Obviously, I ate today. Okay. So we do eat, we need food, and we're talking about table food, and we are talking about meat, and we'll get to that because that's included. And we are talking about permanent protection because we're sick and tired of going through a farm crisis every 30 or 40 years. We've had about enough of that, and what permanent protection does is dedicate land solely to that purpose in perpetuity. So we get done on the roller coaster of land prices. So we have the healthy, fewest chemicals possible, maybe none. Also a lot of perennial. We've got the food, stuff you can actually eat, and we've got the permanent protection. Okay, that's silt. Now, I didn't make any comments before, or write down any comments before I got here because I wanted to hear what these wonderful ladies had to say. And I want to start by saying Connie is an expert. She spent her whole life doing this and knowing what she knows. So at great risk, because I'm not an expert, I'm going to just say a few things that might set her off. But I've got this gal between us, and I got witnesses. There is this notion that there was this wild place before the Europeans showed up with just, not saying that you said this, but with something of a smattering of Native Americans running around. And let's just say that we're not exactly sure how many Native Americans are here, but there were a ton of them. And they were all eating. And they were all managing the land because that's the only way they could eat. I think the biggest difference, according to the experts, is that they moved and we don't, right? So while they burned the prairie and worked the forests for their food, we settled and tore up the prairie and then tore it up the next year, and then we tore it up, and everything that Connie explained. But let's not ignore the fact that there were human beings on this earth, on this continent, bearing children, raising children, growing old, eating every day. And we were in much better balance than we are today, as Connie had indicated. And let's just assume we can't go back to that, because I don't think any of us really want to be that way, right? Let's be honest. But is there a way to find that balance that a few folks have referred to and still enjoy many of our current creature comforts and way of life? Something else I wanted to say. I think Connie referred to more of a compromise by introducing native plants. Iowa State's version of sustainable agriculture, one of them is prairie strips, which I think are a great idea, and they have wonderful science behind them. You don't have to put all that much prairie into a field to stop that erosion and solve a lot of problems. Of course, it doesn't solve the ultimate problem, which is everything in between the fields is still eroding, okay? And that's the next step of their research, I understand, is what do you do about that? Our solution at Silt is you don't plant this kind of stuff on slopes. You plant annual plants on flat ground, and you plant perennial food-producing plants on slopes. And I love my prairie, and we planted prairie. Connie's seen it, and but I can't eat it. On a good day, I can sell the flowers at the market or the seed to someone else who wants to plant prairie, and I talk to farmers about that. I say, I know you love your pollinators. That's not too abstract. They can see the pollinators helping their corn and their other crops, let's hope. We love the aesthetics of it, and we love the fact that we know it's holding soil and nitrates. But the farmer is sitting there saying, yeah, but that land is actually out of production. I'm paying taxes on that land, and I have expenses for that land, but that land's not making me any money. So that's why I talk to them about selling seed and flowers sustainably. Not all of them in every season. And I think we need to think more like that. Mighty Earth. Mighty Earth, our friend here, what was your name again? Margaret? Margaret
Yeah.
said that that Mighty Earth is protecting the natural world from agriculture. Okay, can we go back to the first question? Who ate today? Come on, you can do better. Honest to God, still, oh, thank you, finally somebody. Okay, so you ate today. So can we afford to protect the natural world from agriculture? I don't think so. I think we need to figure out how to grow our food, and it is food, to give you that. We want to grow food in a way that works with nature. Because first of all, I don't think we want to go up against Mother Nature. I think she knows quite well what she's doing, which is why our Earth is heating up, because she's responding to it, like when we have a fever. But can we find a way to live here as mammals and still eat and work well with the wild, or at least the wild as we know it from our own history? The RFS is more, the renewable fuel standard was as much a response to the overproduction of corn than anything else. So let's remember that. And for those of you who don't know the source of the overproduction of corn, go back to your World War II history. And you'll find that the byproducts of war are what caused the industry we have today. And I don't have time to get into that, and I'm not even an expert at that. I'm not an expert at anything, but I'm telling you, go look for the experts and learn why we're overproducing corn right now. Farmers are making choices from the choices they have. Let's give them new choices. Anybody here eat mayonnaise today? Anybody have a sandwich? I did. Nobody had a sandwich? Thank you. Anybody have, I don't know, soup? Oh my God, what do you people eat? I'm sorry, in Iowa City.
I had peanut butter and jelly.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Peanut butter and jelly. Tofu? I mean, tofu? We're in Iowa City, right? Okay, so.
Kale.
Kale, right. I'm telling you that there is a very good chance that if something you ate or something you wore is something that one of these farmers grew out in that field, and somebody bought it. And there's this whole infrastructure built now for them to sell it easily and not have to deal with you, the customers, right? They don't want to deal with you. They just want to grow stuff. So we need to rebuild the system that allows people to grow food, whole food, including meat, because last time I checked, meat was part of the prairie, right? We have deer, we had elk, we have voles, we have mice, we have rats, we got, raccoons. God knows we got raccoons and possum. Okay, they're all out there making that system. So why can't we imitate that meat in our farming system? And why can't we let them graze around like they would in an open field? Why can't we grow happy meat? Right? Because if we grow happy meat, we're going to sequester more carbon than just about every other solution the geniuses have come up with worldwide. Check the studies. They're international. Carbon sequestration happens when you pasture your meat. Of course, we're undoing all of that with each CAFO on Iowa's landscape, but we gotta turn that around. So those are our thoughts. The Mighty Earth says they're asking the hard questions. And bless you, but Anya got me on here because she knew I wasn't going to play well. Don't fire her for that. She's very, very good. They're asking very hard questions. They're giving very soft answers. They have no definition for sustainable. Millennials, why are you even buying this? Y'all are the ones that are saying we need to know where our stuff comes from. We're not buying any smoke. We're not taking any smoke on what sustainable means. We want to know exactly what's going on out there. Define sustainable for us. We define it on our website. We have sustainability guidelines and requirements. And I hope that in the future, Mighty Earth will get more serious about telling us what exactly they mean by that, because I have looked and asked and asked. We also say electrification is coming. Well, last time I checked, the electrification that was fueling our cars was not coming from solar. It was largely coming from fossil fuels. So if we put pressure to create the electrification of our vehicles, we're going to have to put like pressure, and I know these guys will talk about it, on getting rid of our fossil fuel production, right? So we can't just feel good about driving our Prius because your mind is still mine on coal to do it, okay? So the answers are complicated and they're hard to say because they make people feel guilty or bad or angry. And yet we need a little bit of anger to get where we gotta go. So I ask for good, long-lasting solutions that aren't easy, that are complicated, and don't just come during the caucuses, but come all the time, because we're the ones who live here, and we love you that you're from the Midwest, but we want to see you after the election, and working out there with the rest of us and doing the hard work that Connie's been doing and so many of the activists in this room. Thank you very much.
I'm gonna jump in real quick.
Uh-oh.
No,
Thank you.
No, this is great. I definitely didn't promise a just everybody's agreeing thing, right? This is a discussion, so I appreciate this. This is why we're here, right? To talk about this and to dig into the issues and the difficult things. Even though it's not technically a debate, I think, 10 seconds to explain your, no, just kidding.
No.
We'll get back to that,
We'll have a
yes.
discussion.
But I just want to say I want to jump in and be like, this is exciting for me. And I hope it's exciting for everybody that we're talking about different ideas and, yeah.
That's what I want, a real discussion. Let's do it.
I think I drew the shortest straw going after. I'm just kidding. You're probably one of the few people that I would be happy to disagree with like every day because I know that we would be getting someplace in our solution. So on a sidebar, I had nothing like this prepared in my remarks. I'm a city councilor in North Liberty as well for almost 10 years or almost 12 years now, and I look for other candidates that I can disagree with on a weekly basis. That I can then walk away from that conversation being a little bit smarter about what I thought I knew the answer to, because most of the time I don't know the answer. I think I do, but I don't. So I'm really happy that you're here. I think I'm probably just a conduit to this solution. Electrification is something that the United States took on 100 years ago. We decided that we were going to supply electricity to homes, and we're off and running. As a result of that, we went through the industrial age. We built amazing things, and we continue to. We can drive something across this nation in a day or two if you ordered a pair of sneakers from someplace else. So we can achieve those things. How we got here, though, is doing harm to our planet. So about 12 years ago, coinciding with being on city council, I became a father for the first time. Before she was born, my wife and I decided that I would be a stay-at-home parent. So I took on that role for about 5 or 6 years because we had a second one in the time. So did a lot of time listening to folks like Connie, everybody else that's up here, Susan, and I learned that this is a passion that I have. Renewable energy and how to fix this problem, because I now have 2 new human beings that I put on this planet, and it's getting worse out there. So I started looking around of ways that I could be a part of this solution with a banking and a finance and an economics degree, and renewable energies were an easy thing, but solar energy stuck out for me. It's something that every single homeowner can put on the roof of their home and basically leave it alone. It makes electricity for you. It doesn't require the utility company providing that electricity to you. So I knew that it would have an impact on the environment. There would be a significant reduction in carbon dioxide being created as a result of that. So that's how I got into this business. So Monday, April 1st, will be my 5-year anniversary working for Moxie Solar up in North Liberty. At the time, I was the 7th person brought into that company. 4 of them were family members, 3 of them were family members. So I felt still like the outsider, and I still do today, and we're over 70 people strong. So our home office is still in North Liberty, but we have an office location in the Quad Cities, one in Peoria, Illinois, and now one in Dixon, Illinois as well. So the benefits of going solar are things that I started talking about from day one, even though I knew nothing about them. I knew that I wanted to be telling people about it, so I quickly understood the technology so that I could explain that to other people. That's what I do for a living. I am a business developer, but if you think about it, that means something different every single day. Mike and I were in Des Moines today advocating for solar energy so that a sunrise tax legislation would not come up in the Iowa House. That was part of my day. Being here with you tonight is part of my day. Actually sitting down with homeowners and telling them how solar energy will work on their home is part of my day as well. So education is something that I do as part of this process, and listening to folks that are a whole lot smarter than me talk about how I can help them provide this solution. So this, I'm just this conduit, I feel like, in this solution. The financial benefits are the thing that I mostly will talk about with the customer initially, or I'm educating a school or a nonprofit or a business or a farm on the financial benefits that are in play. There are federal and state tax credits that are in place, incentives to do the right thing, and when you see those in writing, that oftentimes makes that choice. But every single person, before we have that financial conversation, is doing it for a different reason. They're doing it for the environmental impact. They're doing it to provide some, you use the words diversity stabilization. You're a farmer, you want to stabilize a cost. You don't want to be in the middle of a farm crisis. I grew up outside of West Branch, and my parents they don't ever tell me this, but I'm pretty sure I was a byproduct of the farm crisis in the 1980s. So my parents got off the farm in the 80s, and my dad started his own company. So we weren't diversified, and we still aren't as an economy to do that. So solar energy then is something that fits in quite well to a lot of people's business model, whether it's your home budget or whether it's your farming operation, where you know you're going to have a set amount of electricity that you've already paid for. It's been paid for back in 2018, 2013, whenever you constructed your solar array. So the example I have of a farmer is one that we constructed. He was one of the first ones that we constructed after the federal and state tax credits came on board back in 2012. We put 400 solar panels on his pretty well diverse farm. He has hogs, he has cattle, he has a significant amount of land, corn and soybean that all that crop needs to be dried at the end of the year. So I've looked up his project since then and recognized that he has, which paragraph here? He's produced about nearly 1 million kilowatt hours, or 900,000 kilowatt hours of electricity in just these 5 years. And they have offset a nearly 1.4 million pounds of greenhouse gases from being produced. So they're doing their part as well as feeding us and the rest of the world. But they also saved a whole lot of money. They've saved over $126,000 in electric bills in just the last 5 years. So imagine what your electric bill is at your house if it's $75 or $150 a month. These farmers spend thousands of dollars a year on electric bills. So this is, again, as a conduit, providing them an opportunity to stabilize what they would otherwise be susceptible to an increase in utility rates. So this is a solution that helps them. Some of the obstacles that we go through, do you have me on the timer as well?
Oh, you've all gone.
I'm all
That's
gone,
no
yeah.
big deal.
I think that pretty much went out the window when Connie started, so. I will say solar's not an easy conversation, and it hasn't been since the first day. And when I told my wife I was gonna go to work for this new technology, but they're right in town though, honey, I can just, they're right here in town. She was susceptible, or she was nervous, and inside I was too, because I had no idea what I was gonna be getting myself into. I quickly realized after about 6, 9, 12 months in this though, that how much that industry changes every day is something that I look forward to and I cherish, being able to be a part of this new conversation. It is not the same today as it was last Wednesday. and it's not the same as it was, a month ago. So we've lived through tariff increases in the last 18 months, not just in solar, but something that you may not think about, steel prices have also gone up tremendously. So, and they're part of a solar arrays construction. Rules and regulations on where you can put solar inside of city limits. Cities have gotten a little bit more agile with that. They used to be kind of set in their ways. We spent a lot of time talking to them about how to make the permitting process easier, less expensive. Anyone that constructed a solar array here in Iowa City this past summer, you didn't have to pay an $800 engineering fee that we helped them to understand. They were already satisfying all their requirements of that, but they just wanted some extra assurance that cost $800. We help them understand that there's already a mechanism in place. They don't need that fee. They don't need that permitting. So that's the kind of conversation that we have on a daily basis. Tax credits. Federal tax credits were set in place 7 years ago. We have 3 more years, including this one, that are left. The state of Iowa goes right along with it, but lo and behold, last year at the Iowa House, they thought about not renewing those, not chipping in money for those state tax credits. So that's where I spent the couple of months last spring talking about that, just like I spent some time this spring talking about keeping the bill at the Iowa House and Senate from becoming a reality and basically eliminating the solar industry here in Iowa. So although that kind of sounds dark and gray, it's different. Every day is different in this industry, and getting opportunity to be part of that solution is an exciting aspect of what I do. I'm done.
Oh, thank you. Well, thanks. It's a real honor for me to be up here and among with a lot of friends here. I think I recognize just about everybody in the crowd, and I want to thank Anya for putting this on and for being here the last 3 months, and Mighty Earth for having the guts to come to Iowa and during caucus season and talk about and not kissing the butt of big corn. I mean, most people do during caucus season. They come in and they bow down to big corn and big ag and tell people what they want to hear. To tell people what they don't want to hear takes intestinal fortitude. So it was the caucus process that got me into renewable energy and being a climate advocate. Al Gore ruined my life 20 years ago. So I was caucusing for Bill Bradley, but Al Gore was the vice president, and everybody has a book, and I had read Bill Bradley's book, and so I thought I'd better read Al Gore's book in 1999, and it was a 3-year-old book called Earth in the Balance. It was the first time I heard about global warming and climate change. And I was a long-haired antique dealer, and I was freaked out, and I said, I got to do something about this. I'm an overeducated, long-haired antique dealer. I could use my services better. So I became an environmental advocate. First, it was as just a citizen, and I joined the Sierra Club, and that's where I probably met Tom Karsner. And we worked on global warming, what we called it then, and climate change solutions. And, I realized at that time that global warming was real, that it was deadly serious, that we needed to do something about it right now, and of course that it was man-made, and it wasn't just cyclical, and it wasn't just cow farts or cow belches. So I started figuring out what to do, what were the climate change solutions. And the first one is using less energy, and that's either conservation or energy efficiency. And then what energy we do need, we need to produce it with renewable energy, wind and solar. And so I joined iRenew, and then I ended up running that organization, and I'm on the board of the Iowa Wind Energy Association. I helped start ISETA back in the day, and I was the lobbyist back in the day when we got the state tax credit in 2012. I was Tim Dwight's lobbyist, a solar dealer, former Iowa football player. But then, there's other climate change solutions, and some of those are transportation related. And so that's electric vehicles, and that's buses, and that's biking, and all sorts of stuff, or walking, and we can't do it all that way. But then agriculture plays such a huge portion of this. And so I was advocating at the time for, biofuels and biomass and all this other bio stuff. And my brother, who's an environmental engineer, he says, Mike, what the hell are you doing? I said, well, those are renewable energy sources. And he says, no, they're not. He says, if you're concerned about renewable energy and climate change, we need to quit burning shit. And it doesn't matter whether you can grow it again the next year. He says, burning is burning, quit burning stuff, but he used the word shit. So we need to quit burning shit. So electrification is good, but it can't solve all of our problems. And agriculture, being a large portion of it, is part of the solution. And a hooved animal turns over the soil and makes it a carbon sink in doing that. Now, talking about biofuels, it was about that time, maybe 12 years ago or so, when a lot of CRP land was coming up, their 10-year contracts, and they were coming up, and the corn was $8 a bushel. And so there's the CRP land, and they're not paying very much for it, and that's the land that's marginal, and a lot of times it's along creeks, and maybe has never been planted before. We used to have all these fences around because we used to graze the cattle out there, and hogs and everything else, but now they're in confinements. So what did they do? They plowed up those strips along the creeks. They took out the fences because there's no livestock out there anymore. And used to say fence row to fence row. Well, there's no more fence row to fence row. It's ditch to ditch, because you can pull the combine and the planter out over the road and get more corn per acre out of that. So biofuels was never an energy policy. And as a couple people have already mentioned, it's ag policy, is to soak up excess production. So that first started as a fuel additive to replace MTBE, which is very, very bad stuff. As a fuel additive, it's an oxygenator. And then they started going to E10, and now we're at E15, and it used to be just in the summer, but they finally passed it, now E15 all year round. I sit on the board of the Iowa Farmers Union with Susan. I just came back from the National Farmers Union Convention, and now they're pushing E30. And so now they want even more biofuels than we currently have. And I'm sorry, I mean, our national policy is that. I can't stand behind that. So biofuels has always been ag policy. We talked about that. It's a false climate change solution. I've always fought false climate change solution. Biomass, biofuels, nuclear power. We need to be wary of false climate change solutions. So what do? We talked about conservation, efficiency, renewable energy, regenerative, and sustainable ag. The thing about the fallacy that we have in Iowa is that we feed the world. They always say, oh, we feed the world. Well, hell, we don't even feed ourselves. We import more food than any other state other than Hawaii. We don't feed the world, we feed hogs and we feed cars. That's what we do here in Iowa. And it's a line of bullshit that they're giving us that we feed the world. We need to start feeding our own community with growing real food in land that's protected, and we all can have a part in that. You can vote with your fork. You know, you can, when you go to a restaurant, ask them how they source their produce. Where do you get your vegetables? Where do you get your meat? If it's CAFO meat, don't order it. And tell them that. Say, I'm not gonna order that pork tenderloin because it came off the truck and that's probably CAFO pork. I want locally raised, become a localvore if you can. So the thing that's really important here is how, we can change the way we live. We can vote with our fork. We can do all these. We can all drive our electric cars or our Priuses. But policy change is what we need the most. And how do we get policy change? It starts with education. A couple people have talked about that. You need to educate yourself first on the issues. Then you need to educate your family, your friends, and your coworkers. But the most important people you need to educate are your elected officials. And those are your elected officials at the city level, the county level, where I used to serve as a county supervisor, our state representatives, our congressmen, and our president. And we have the unique and awesome responsibility in Iowa every 4 years of having these presidential candidates come through. And what we need to do is hold their feet to the fire on issues that are important to us: climate change, energy policy, sustainable, regenerative agriculture, biofuels. Ask them the hard questions and make sure you get the right answers. And if you don't get the right answers, then you vote for somebody else. That's what we need. We need to have elected officials that are willing to step up and fight climate change. They'd say we got 12 years. Tick, tick, tick. And by the time we get a new president, it'll be 2021. And then it's 9 years. So they say with 12 years when that came out, it's gonna be 2021 till the new president is elected. So, let's see, we got a few notes here. So one of our other problems is that we have the best political system that money can buy. And I mean the last 4 words of that very, very immensely. We, on a national level, we have the fossil fuel billionaires like the Koch brothers basically buying and selling our government. At the state level, it's big ag, led by the Farm Bureau and other big ag companies, Monsanto, et cetera, et cetera. What we need to do is elect local officials too that are willing to stand up to them, stand up to the CAFOs, stand up to the Farm Bureau, stand up to big corn, to biofuels and things like that. And it's gonna take a while to do it, but we need to get the right people in the offices, and that's at every level. And so it matters who you vote to city council, it matters who you vote for county supervisor, because that's the bench. Those people will eventually be up at the State House, they might be in Congress, hell, they might even be the next president. We've got the mayor of South Bend, Indiana, running for president, and he's doing very well right now. That's a city the size of Cedar Rapids. So if he could run for president, you never know, one of you could run for president and do just as good as Mayor Pete. So this is important, is the political process and the policy. We need to squeeze the shoes, but you also need to get involved. Everybody in here needs to join one of the groups that's in here or some of the other groups I have listed. So the Sierra Club, the Sunrise Movement, and we need to start a Sunrise Movement here, right here in Iowa City. And that's a movement by the youth that's advocating for the Green New Deal. And we need to get our congressmen like Dave Loebsack and Abby Finkenauer and Sidney Axney. We need to get them to sign on to that. There's other groups like SILT, the Iowa Farmers Union, the 100 Grannies, the most awesome group in the world, and you don't have to be a granny to join them. You might have to wear a green t-shirt, but or a hoodie, but that'll be cool too. There's the Practical Farmers of Iowa, the 1,000 Friends of Iowa, Iowa Wind Energy Association, Iowa Solar Energy Trade Association, iRenew. There's a lot of groups that you can join. You can do it on your own, but you need to do it. We need to fight like hell, or someone mentioned Mother Nature always having, control. Well, I use the baseball analogy, that Mother Nature always gets the last at bat. And so far, she's undefeated. So Mother Nature is gonna hawk us up like a hairball in less than 30 years. What really, our ability to live on this planet is what is in jeopardy. The Earth will be fine. It'll survive without us, it'll regenerate, it'll be fine. But whether we can live on this planet or not, that's what's in question. And my charge to you is that what are you gonna do about it? Okay? You need to act on climate, and you need to act right now. That's what I got.
Thank you. Thank you. That was great. So now I'm going to open it up for some questions. I'm sure that people have many questions. Got a lot of people who know a lot about a lot of different aspects of this issue. And so, yeah. And please wait until you have the mic to start speaking. We want to make sure everybody can hear.
Hi, Mike, can you hear me okay? Yeah. So all right, my question is for Mike specifically, because you brought up the issue of policy. So one of the things that most of us know, that Iowa's farms, 99% are family owned, right? They're all family farms, but only half of them are actually family farmed. The rest of that landscape has been inherited from, deceased farmers, and now belongs to the offspring who are no longer in the business, yet that land remains in production. The land remains in production. Mm-hmm. So that land right now, the absentee landlords are seeing this as a source of income, and they can feel good about it because they know they're producing biofuels. We've discussed the value of that, but as I've thought about this, I've served on the Leopold Center for Sustainable Agriculture's advisory board for like 15 years, and so I have been thinking about how do you solve this problem, and a policy solution to me would be one that encourages people who have inherited land but have no intention to make a career of farming that land, but rather just seeing it as a source of income, to do something like a long-term lease to a company that puts up wind turbines. So they continue to get income, they still own grandma's farm, they are producing energy, yet if in addition to having a wind farm, you plant with native plants, you prevent you have habitat again, we solve the water quality issue, the landscape, the loss of diversity that we see right now. But right now, I think that, like, listening to the discussion about the removal of INHF's ability to use the revolving fund to purchase land that we heard last week or so, it was striking how unimaginative folks in Des Moines were as far as, well, you own land, you have to grow corn and beans. That is what we do with this land. And how do we encourage a change in how people?
That's,
Well,
Paul is right there, put
yeah.
different people in the offices, but you're right, about 60% of the farmland is cash rented. That means it's farmed by somebody that doesn't own the land. And a lot of times then they care about production. And we've seen them put the planter right through creek beds. I mean, the buffer strip's already gone, but they're willing to not even lift the planter head, and you'll see the corn go from 10 foot down to little miniature stunted plants into the creek and out the other side. And what I think we need to do, policy-wise, is, and I've been trying to figure this out for a long time, is somehow, first I thought it was contracts. The contract you have, the rental contract, the owner needs to have that conservation ethic. And so I always thought that the owner of a land, and it's usually been in their family for 150 years by now, that they have a different soil and land ethic than a cash renter. They care about production. So they could actually put, a covenants in the lease that say you have to do this, and this is the way that you have to farm, or I'll find somebody else to do it. But I was talking to Craig Lang about 5 years ago, and he used to run the Iowa Farm Bureau. And I told him, I said, how do we figure this out? And he said, Mike, he says, what does every farmer need? And I said, I don't know, a feed hat? And he said, oh, no, that's not it. I said, okay, rain, the right amount at the right times. And he goes, yeah, that's good. I said, I don't know where you're getting. He says, well, when you're talking about conservation and all this other stuff, nobody wants the stick, right? They don't want mandates, and we can't afford enough carrots. There's just too much land. We can't afford enough cost share to pay people to farm the right way. And I said, okay. So he says, you tie the carrot to the stick. And I said, well, I don't know what that means. He says, what they really need is they all need crop insurance. So say we got 5 different things that we know work. Minimum tillage or no-till, cover crops, grass waterways, prairie, buffer strips, bioreactors. There's 5 things that work, and there's other ones. And you say to the farmer, to get crop insurance, you need to do 3 or 4 of those, or you don't get crop insurance. They'll start farming in a conservation way very quickly because they need that crop insurance. And I said, okay, how do we do that? That's great. Let's go up to Des Moines and let's advocate for that. He goes, Mike, that's in the Farm Bill. That's a federal deal. And I said, okay, that's easy then. We got Chuck Grassley, we got Tom Harkin at the time. I said, let's do this. He says, well, you know what? The corn farmers and the bean farmers would like that. But he said, those aren't the only commodity crops we have in this country. We've got cotton, we've got rice, and there's other main crops. And he says, they don't buy into that. So that makes it more difficult. But we have to find a way to farm more sustainably, to grow more food. Maybe part of it is lifestyles. Eat less meat. Tofu Tuesdays, meatless Mondays. We eat too much meat. We really do. I eat too much meat. I'm trying to cut down. There's just a lot of things we can do, but policy has to be a big part of it because policy is the biggest mover. A good policy can really change things in a major way very quickly. But I don't even have all the questions, let alone the answers. But those are a couple ways we could do it. Anybody else thoughts on that?
Yeah, just from a different tack, I totally agree we need better policy. It can be so overwhelming, can it? It's kind of paralyzing to figure out how to change policy. I like to speak to the issue of farmers need to make a living, right?
Yeah.
This is
Yes.
generally what they say. And the fact that in Wapello, Iowa, there's a chestnut orchard making $10,000 per acre. And that, according to Iowa State, our beloved Leopold, the center, that we could feed 200 people per acre in Iowa. Right now, we're barely feeding any of them. So I really do think that we also have to provide other choices. We have to let farmers know that if they actually planted the chestnuts, they might have to wait 20 years for the jackpot. But here are the other things you can plant before that. And by the way, stop putting them on slopes. And these specialty crops make a lot of money, by the way. And if you don't want to deal with your customers, we can figure that out. You know, let's give them other choices too, so that farm is no longer a four-letter word. You know, we can find another way to treat our land that mimics nature but still feeds us.
Panel, I have a question back here.
It was sort of just building on what Mike was saying. So realistically and honestly, what do you think our chances are of changing agricultural policy in the state?
Who wants to take that?
Slim and none, and Slim just left town. I don't know. It's going to be hard because Farm Bureau is the Farm Bureau is the most powerful force in the state, and then they have other folks lined up with them, like the investor-owned utilities, the rural electric co-ops. It's very, very hard to do things policy-wise on agriculture. I mean, we don't even treat agriculture as a business. I mean, it's the #1 business in the state, but it has special exemptions that it's not even really considered a business. And I go, how can that be? It's because they get special treatment, and they'll always get special treatment. And I don't know, it's, I remain optimistic. Every time a solar panel goes up, every time a CSA share gets delivered, I'm optimistic. But in the long run, it's going to be very, very difficult. I mean, I'm not optimistic that we can make big changes in agricultural policy in Iowa.
And I'll just jump in here too. Some of these things are not related to what we can do here in Iowa. It's what happens in the world. So if Brazil, for example, goes through an extremely awful growing season, it benefits us. If, on the other hand, they have a bumper crop, it's going to be of detriment to our farmers here. So, you know, Susan mentioned during her talk about having some diversification and some certainty to farmers. And like I mentioned, having grown up on a farm up until a certain point in my life, and I still have that connection to my hometown. That's really what they, and we all, quite honestly, we all will thrive in that kind of environment with some certainty, so that our crops have a market. So if the carrot and the stick can be combined to make that happen, but ultimately too, I think we're mostly preaching to the choir here. We need to spend money. You know, cutting taxes and being afraid to support programs like this, that's the courageous aspect of it. You know, and I speak only from solar. Someone that's investing tens of thousands of dollars in a solar project is a rather courageous person. They didn't know that thing was actually going to make electricity until they got their first electric bill. So we need to spend money to do these things. So writing a document is one thing, but we have to be willing to part ways with money that we make and send to this general pool that we all will benefit from in taxes or whatever those fees are.
Thank you. That's very brave.
I can chime in just a little bit on the on ultimately just how state and local, city, county, and national policy have to work together. A lot of the incentives and carrots we're talking about, they have incentivized really bad agriculture, right? So we have to reform those national policies, and at the same time reform them in a way that don't just take the rug out from under people, but offer them time, resources to adjust and change, and the things that they know to have a predictable path forward, so that they aren't stressed out, that they don't see this as a risky thing, but a certain future, that they know that they're heading in the right direction. On the state level, I think, you know, there's other things you can do. If Iowa were to, have its own climate and kind of Paris commitment, you could start a carbon market right here. You could offer land and regenerative agriculture, conservation credits to the open market, and put a price on that land to conserve it and retain carbon. That's something other states and other countries have done. It's not impossible, and they could offer even a better price than corn and soy. And then at the local level, I would say incentivizing sustainable agriculture. Talk to your city council, your county government about good food purchasing policies. This is your school districts. This is University of Iowa. Any other big organizations that buy and serve a lot of food, restaurants. if they have commitments to buy good food, and there is, terms around what is good and what is sustainable, then farmers locally will know we have all these folks who want our food, and that's an incentive and a guaranteed local market to start growing different things that they know that they can sell locally.
The county put $100,000 last year into a food hub, and they put another $100,000 into it this year. So they're sustaining, which if people don't know, a food hub is kind of the middleman that consolidates this local produce, local food from the farmers, so they don't have to market as much. If they still want to go to the farmer's market, that's fine, but, these commercial kitchens, and, how many meals a day does the Iowa City Community School District serve? I mean, it's like 10,000 or something like that. And one farmer cannot supply all the baby carrots for one meal, so they have to get them from different sources. So this allows the farmer to do what they're best at, which is growing food and not trying to find different people to sell it and do the other things. So local policy is really important. And one thing that I want to mention in crop diversification is hemp. Hemp is a miracle plant. It's a miracle fiber, a miracle oil, and it was passed in the federal farm bill that hemp is no longer a Schedule I drug, and we're trying to pass some laws up at the state of Iowa to comply with the federal farm bill, but they're limiting it to growing at 40 acres because they want to protect small farmers. Well, that's fine, but you're gonna, if Iowa doesn't get on the stick and get the hemp bills in order to allow farmers to grow hemp, then that market is gonna go someplace else. Kentucky and some of these other states, Iowa is a place to grow, and we could probably grow hemp better than anybody, but we're being hamstrung right now by our state officials by them dragging their feet, so.
We have another question here.
Hello. So we have a room full of people who care. People who have been fighting for these causes for years and years. Yet, we struggle every day to have the masses connect the dots. Do you have advice for us as to how to talk to our neighbors, our family, our friends, for the Sunrise Movement as we try to garner attention and momentum? We're here, we have 12 years to turn this around, and yet, again, we've had people fighting for this for years. And I go, why? How do we talk to people? How do we get them angry? Where do I find my angry mob? Because I want them? So, do you have any advice how to talk to the general public, and how do we change their opinion?
How many
Thank you.
people know that Wednesday night is choir night? Anybody here grow up with that? Is this Wednesday night?
Yeah.
Okay, go to church. I'm the last person to say that. My mother was Catholic, my father was Muslim, right? So totally insincere, both of them. But I know a lot of folks here are probably humanists or Unitarians, which I think is the same thing, or Quakers. The Quakers left, but I know them. But we've started hanging out with folks that go to much more conservative churches, because they care about the earth, they care about their food intake and everything else, it's like we do. We find the common ground where we can. And if they want to praise God for that, why not? Let them, if it works for them. And go to the FFA meeting or the 4-H meeting if you're in school. Go to the coffee shop where the old gals are sitting in one coffee shop and the old guys are sitting in the other one, right? Because we don't have Sharia law in Iowa, right? But yet we separate ourselves out like this, right? And go sit down with them. They'd love to see somebody under, 60, and just say, hi, I'm here, and I'm here to learn, and I'd just love to know what trips your trigger. And we need to talk to people that are not like us and start understanding where their anger comes from, because that anger motivated an awful lot of people a few years ago. And I have a feeling with just a few tweaks, it would have gone the other way. So we just need to understand our fellow human beings a little better by talking to people not like us.
And I think we all have something to say about this. I think be willing to be uncomfortable in your conversations. Try not to be around people that are like you, and be in places where you're gonna stick out. Mike, I just could not imagine you at a farm conference or a convention. That had to have been really uncomfortable for you. So do that stuff, though. Engage with someone that doesn't have your same opinion, because you will learn from them. And you'll also either make them mad, or you'll get mad and walk out, but you'll be more engaged that way.
My advice, go to one local city council, board of zoning adjustment, one local meeting a month in front of policymakers, at least one meeting a month. Talk to people you don't ordinarily talk to. Start a book club with people who are very different from you, or find wherever, that gathering is happening of folks that are different than you. And really start to think about, there's a big difference between gathering folks for a protest and building a movement. And it's about relationships. It's about patience and endurance, and kind of thinking through the crisis to what's around the bend. But those are, I think, things to reflect on and talk about and think about when you are doing whatever campaign or whatever issue that you're working on.
We got a quick question back here, and then we'll.
I want to just address that real quickly. So everybody talks about the weather. So next time you're out, wherever you are, and someone starts talking about that, how about that flood over in Nebraska and western Iowa? Ask them a question back. Well, what do you think's causing that? Water. Yeah, water. Cow farts. I mean, what is it? And so engage them, find out what they think about climate change. Well, what could we do about it? Ask more questions than, instead of giving, I give way too many speeches, and I need to listen more. But ask a good question. I'm looking right at Tom, who always tells me that I need to listen more. But ask them a question about, why is the weather so freaky? The fires in California, the flooding, what's causing that? And then find out what they say.
Mike, one of the most hilarious moments on NPR was just a few days ago when
Yeah.
they were interviewing people in Nebraska and Iowa,
Yeah.
and they kept trying to get them to say climate change.
Yeah.
Like, no,
And they went-
no, it happens all the time. No, it was great. So good luck with the answers.
Yeah. Okay, we got a question in the back.
I wonder how many of you all are aware of Elizabeth Warren's proposal to wipe out big ag, essentially, do away with vertical integration, sunder the alliance between Bayer and Monsanto, make a greater variety of seeds available, and so on. The article was in the Des Moines Register this morning, so don't know what your thoughts might be.
I agree.
It would have been great to have her as president. But that probably sealed her fate. I didn't get to see the paper, but that's a very exciting proposition. Very exciting.
Yeah, vertical integration is one of the biggest problems we have. In the hog industry, those people that run that CAFO, they don't own the hogs. Those are owned by all the way up, and they own everything, except that the farmer has to take out $1 million loan to build the CAFO facility, and then they put solar on it to cut their costs. But we have that all over the big food. It's more than big ag, because you find it in the grocery business too. So I'm calling it more than big ag. It's big food, and it's all vertically integrated.
All right, we have time for one more really quick question. Sorry, I don't mean to cut you off. I just want one more quick and then.
Hello. It's not really a question. It's more of a comment for what all of you have said. My name's Corbin Schultz. I just started a small-scale organic farm in Iowa City. And I want to say that, yeah, there are a lot of programs to help farmers, the Conservation District, the Iowa Department of Revenue doing farm tax exemptions and like FSA loans and stuff, but I've been turned away from all of these places because they don't understand what it's like to be a small-scale farmer. The 10-foot-tall deer fence I'm building myself around 3 acres of land with T-posts and netting is not covered under farm tax exemption because they don't care. They're like, why are you keeping deer? I'm like, the vegetables, like they're gonna eat all of my crops, right? And the FSA loan, I went to get a microloan and they were like, okay, so microloans for under $50,000 and I don't need that much to get started, just something to get my feet on the ground. And they were like, we're gonna have to write a check for every single thing that you're gonna buy. And I'm like, I'm buying tape measures and seeds and stuff. You're gonna have to write a check for me and process all of this. And they were like, basically, because this loan is for farmers who wanna buy one tractor or one building or whatever. And so I think, like, great, everything you're saying, vote, yes, but I think it starts more local. I think, like, every time you buy food, in the, like, supporting small-scale farmers, that's where we get our money because we don't have this help from other places. And we, like, a crazy statistic is like in other societies and other countries, people spend around 80% of their income on food, for like good food that's good for the environment, good for their health. And here we spend about 10% of our income on food, where like we're supporting Tyson's, which is where all these confined animals are, which is their poop is going into our rivers, creating the dead zone in the ocean. And so instead of doing that, go to your farmer's market and buy from local farmers and really hear what they have to say about like their like ways of conservation, I guess, on their farm. But also there's a word that I don't really like to hear, and that's sustainable, because we talked about like soil degradation and leaching and climate change, and if we sustain where we're at now, like that's not good. So I think we need to regenerative farming, more so like getting local inputs and getting like, I don't know, like having money stay in the economy and stuff like that. Yeah, I don't know, just a couple quick things coming from like a farmer myself and like kind of the struggles I've had to face just this year getting started. And yeah.
Okay. On that note, I wanted to thank you for raising that, and really it actually goes back to the comment about Elizabeth Warren's policy, and this is the issue of banks and financing. And I think that's frankly, a dynamic to this conversation that Iowa unfortunately knows kind of worse than anybody else in this country. We need to do a better job educating and changing some of our financial policies to really understand the risks that anybody who wants to do something differently than what the market is currently dictating, which would be better for the environment, and offer some real viable solutions there. So I think that has to be a part of the conversation. And whether it's big food or big banks, it's the same system, and we need some major reforms there.
I want to add that we have a slow money club in Iowa City, that actually does loan locally. Local people who don't really know what we're doing, loaning locally to sustainable food and farm enterprises. And I use the word sustainable because if I call it regenerative, I'd have to rename silt rilt. But we mean regenerative. And whatever word they come up with next year.
I'll just add one more thing about banks. And I hadn't thought about this, but I lived out in the Washington, D.C. area for about 7 years after college. And if you're in Washington, D.C., you have 3 banks to choose from. You have Wells Fargo, you have U.S. Bank, and I'm not sure who's there.
Oh, we just got Chase. So.
Oh, there you go.
Oh, wow.
But locally, you cross the state lines in Iowa. You have a plethora of community banks, and I think we are in a very, very unique and enviable position. But you don't know that if you've never left the state and had to live in these parts of the country where they don't have those choices. So walk in and have that conversation with a small bank that may not know, because you may educate them on what you need.
I like the way you don't like the term sustainable. It's everybody's sustainable, just like every Democrat now is a progressive Democrat, whether they are or they aren't. But everything is sustainable. So I like regenerative because it talks about, regenerative to me is about soil. And it's about soil health. And our soil is dead right now. And regenerative agriculture is all about restoring health of both the soil and our bodies. And so knowing your farmer and buying your farmer, know who raised your meat. There's meat, of course there's meat CAFOs, but there's meat CSAs. You can go to the farmer's market and you can meet somebody that's pasture raising every kind of meat that you want if you are a meat eater. And you can get it down there every week. And sometimes you can go out to their farm and get it there, or they'll even deliver it to you. And their vegetables. So CSAs, the farmer's market. There's a farmer's market in Johnson County during the summer, I think 6 days a week. So you can go someplace in Johnson County and buy that produce. Good luck to you. Is this your first growing season?
Here in Iowa,
Yeah, congratulations, thank you. And it takes a lot of guts to doing what you're doing, and I wish you I wish you good. I wish you well.
All right. Thank you so much. I'm sorry to cut people off. I know there are a lot more questions. But that's good. We'll just have to continue the conversation, right? If you have other questions, I think a good thing to do is on our event page or on our Mighty Earth page, you can go ahead and post those questions, whether it's to a specific person on the panel or elsewise. I will do my best to get those questions out to the people that it's addressed to, and let's get this conversation going. Just a couple things. I know people are ready to go. It's been a wonderful evening. Thank you again to our fantastic speakers here and for fielding all the questions. Thank you to everyone for coming, for bringing your questions, for being open to new ideas, and continuing on for our farmers out there who are doing their best to just, to survive and to make change and to do it the right way too.
And make a living.
Make a living, yes. If you did not sign in, please make sure you sign in. I just want to make sure that we've got a good head count on everybody. A couple other things, if you haven't signed our petition for the Real Climate Action Better than Biofuels, head on back to that table. We are also building a local coalition of organizations, community leaders, farmers, all of that, basically advocating for these real climate solutions, and we'd love to have you on board. We also have a couple other events coming up, specifically next Wednesday, a week from tonight, Church Wednesday, or Choir Wednesday. So here at the library, we're gonna have an activist training workshop. The wonderful Mighty Earth Iowa City team will be leading trainings in grassroots organizing on modules like recruitment and breaking down campaigns into goals, strategy, tactics. So free, come on out, 6:30 in meeting room D. I'll post about it on Facebook, so check us out. And yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.